In 1978, Mercedes-Benz engineers looked at BMW's first attempt at a mid-engine supercar and dismissed it as a toy company playing dress-up. One line, repeated inside Stuttgart's design studios, summed up the mood. BMW builds sedans, not supercars. Then BMW put that car on a racetrack with Formula One world champions behind the wheel and forced Mercedes to watch a company they had mocked for years turn a toy into the most talked-about racing spectacle in Europe. To understand how a small, financially strapped homologation project ended up humiliating the biggest name in German engineering, you need to know what BMW was actually building behind closed doors and why nobody in Stuttgart or Maranello took it seriously until it was already too late. By the mid-1970s, BMW had a reputation problem. They made brilliant sedans and sharp coupes, but in the world of exotic, mid-engine sports cars, the world that Ferrari, Lamborghini, and increasingly Porsche owned, BMW was an outsider. Mercedes-Benz, sitting comfortably atop German engineering's hierarchy, saw no reason to worry. Why would they? BMW had never built a mid-engine car in its entire history. The idea that this Munich manufacturer of family saloons could suddenly produce something worthy of a racetrack was, to most of the German auto establishment, faintly ridiculous. Reports from the period describe engineers at rival manufacturers joking that BMW's M badge, the one that would go on to define performance for the next 50 years, hadn't earned the right to sit next to a mid-engine layout. BMW's answer was audacious. Build a car specifically to dominate Motorsport's Group 4 and Group 5 categories, then use racing rules that required road-legal versions to be sold to the public. That car became the M1, and it would be the very first model to wear BMW Motorsport's badge and the very first mid-engine sports car BMW had ever built. This wasn't a vanity project. It was a calculated assault on categories BMW had never competed in, using a loophole in homologation law that forced them to build hundreds of road cars just to be allowed to race. Here's the detail almost nobody outside enthusiast circles knows. BMW did not even build the M1 themselves at first. They partnered with a Lamborghini, yes, the same Lamborghini that had spent over a decade making mid-engined exotics, because BMW had zero in-house experience with the layout. It should have been the perfect partnership. Instead, Lamborghini's finances collapsed mid-project. The company that was supposed to teach BMW how to build a proper mid-engine supercar could not even pay its own suppliers, and BMW was left holding a half-finished car with nowhere to build it. That single moment, Lamborghini's collapse, would later force BMW into a scramble that critics were certain would kill the project entirely. Development and production had to be picked up and scattered across different companies and countries just to get the M1 into existence at all. We will get back to exactly how BMW pulled that apart later, because the way they solved it says everything about why this car ended up embarrassing the very people who doubted it. While the business side was falling apart, the design side was quietly becoming a masterpiece. BMW brought in Giorgetto Giugiaro, already one of the most respected car designers in the world, and gave him a mandate to make something that looked like nothing else on German roads. What he delivered was a low, wedge-shaped body built from fiberglass, aggressive, and futuristic, in a way that made contemporary Mercedes coupes look like they belonged in a different decade. Under that fiberglass skin sat a 3.5-liter DOHC inline-six, fed by Kugelfischer mechanical fuel injection, producing somewhere around 273 to 277 horsepower, depending on which spec sheet you trust. For a mid-1970s road car from a company with zero mid-engine pedigree, those numbers weren't just respectable. They were a direct challenge to the establishment that had spent years assuming BMW couldn't compete in this space at all. But numbers on paper don't humiliate anyone. What happened next did. Homologation rules meant BMW had to build and sell road cars before the M1 could legally race, and that's exactly where the project nearly died a second time. Production delays piled up. Regulatory changes shifted the goalposts BMW had been building toward. The racing categories the M1 was designed to dominate kept moving underneath them, and by the time the car was finally ready, the Group 4 and Group 5 planned BMW had spent years chasing simply wasn't going to happen the way they'd drawn it up. To every rival watching from Stuttgart and Maranello, this looked like confirmation. BMW had bitten off a racing program it couldn't finish, and the M1 was about to become an expensive, humiliating footnote, a supercar built for a race series that no longer wanted it. This is the moment that would have ended most projects. And it's the moment BMW instead used to build something none of their rivals saw coming. Rather than accept defeat, BMW's management made a decision that, on paper, sounded almost absurd. If the established racing series wouldn't take the M1, BMW would build their own series and stock it with the best drivers on the planet. That's how the PROCAR Championship was born. BMW gathered identical M1s, prepared to identical specifications, and handed the keys to a grid that read like a Formula One roster. Niki Lauda, Nelson Piquet, and a young Brazilian named Ayrton Senna among them, racing wheel-to-wheel as a support series at Grand Prix weekends across Europe. Suddenly, the car that skeptics said was a homologation failure was headlining the same race weekends as Formula One itself, watched by the same crowds, covered by the same press. Think about what that actually did to the narrative. Mercedes hadn't dismissed the M1 because they thought it was slow. They dismissed it because they didn't believe BMW belonged in this category at all, that a sedan manufacturer had no business building something exotic enough to matter. And now here was BMW's answer. Not buried in an obscure regional racing series, but sharing a stage with the biggest names in motorsport, at the biggest events in the world, in identical cars where the only variable left was driver skill. There was no bigger stage BMW could have chosen to prove they belonged. The road cars themselves backed up the spectacle. Because homologation demanded it, BMW had to build road-legal M1s to sell to the public, and they built exactly 400 of them, alongside 53 dedicated race cars for a combined production run of roughly 453 units. That scarcity, born entirely out of a racing rulebook rather than any marketing strategy, is part of why the M1 became legendary rather than forgotten. Every single one of those cars existed because BMW refused to let bureaucratic and financial disasters stop them from proving a point. And the point landed. The M1 didn't just enter the conversation around Europe's elite sports cars, it became the origin story for BMW Motorsport's entire M division, the badge that would go on to define BMW's fastest, most serious cars for the next 5 decades. Every M3, every M5, every M car that BMW has built since traces its lineage back to this one wedge-shaped, fiberglass-bodied gamble that started as a scramble to save a collapsed Lamborghini partnership. Mercedes had looked at a company with no mid-engine experience and assumed they'd stay in their lane. Instead, BMW turned a failed partnership, a rulebook loophole, and a stalled racing program into the single most consequential model in their history. One that put Formula One drivers in identical cars on the world's biggest stages and forced every rival who doubted them to watch it happen in real time. The M1 never became the dominant Group 4 or Group 5 racer BMW originally drew up on paper. In the end, that almost doesn't matter. What it became instead, a legend built out of desperation, engineering ambition, and a refusal to accept no from an industry that had already written it off, proved to be worth far more than a trophy in a racing series nobody remembers today. Sometimes the car that fails at its original mission ends up winning a completely different war. Share your thoughts below.